welcome. So this is my Power Apps tips from a first-time user session. And I put in a couple slides that I stole from the Power Platform conference a couple years ago, because I think that this is so important. If you're getting started in the Power Platform community, or if you're even a part of the Power Platform community, you need to know about these two things. So first of all is the Power Up program. We may have people in this group that have already done this. It's getting a little more widespread now, but I think it's very important. If you're getting started, Microsoft offers a Power Up program that is really a guided learning for the Power Platform. I think it's 12 weeks, and it's actually like you get a group together, and Microsoft takes you through this this course with the goal of having zero Power Platform experience at the beginning to being certified at the end. So check out that link if you want to learn more about the Power Up program. But I think I know they've had quite a few graduates now. They've been through a couple of rounds of it since they started this, but definitely check it out if that's something that you're interested in. And the second one is the community calls. So when I started presenting to the Power Platform community, I had said, like, raise your hand if you've ever been to a community call. And I think about 3 people of 200 raised their hands. So that's not acceptable. We need to get more word out there about the Power Platform community calls. So the community calls are really just an hour long each. I think they're every 3 weeks. And they cover like 15 minutes of announcements about the Power Apps or Power Platform community specifically. And then they go into these like 12 to 15 minute demos. I think there's usually 3 where they show you something that they've built. So I think it's really great for inspiration and just to give you ideas of what can actually be built with the Power Platform. You can kind of see little snippets of what's out there. So, and then I also have a link to the Power Platform community blog. So again, check out the community calls, join the Power Platform community. And let's actually get started with the presentation then. So my name is Heidi Jordan. I am a manager for Modern Workplace with Avanade. I am a Microsoft MVP for business applications. I am just up the street in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So it's great to be here today. I tell everyone that I'm a SharePoint girl living in a Power Platform world because SharePoint was my first love, probably always will be. But since 2016, I've really gotten to do a lot of Power Platform, and that's kind of where I live these days. So I included my contact information on the screen there. Feel free to reach out if you have questions. Always happy to talk to people that are trying to go through this transformation with Power Platform or are really used to the on-prem tools and now are needing to do anything with SharePoint Online or Power Platform. So let's go over the agenda. So today we're going to I like to just introduce this, let's talk about some assumptions of if we are getting started with Power Apps specifically, like what are the different tools that we're going to use and kind of lay the groundwork of what we're going to use and talk about today. And then I developed kind of a 6-step process to get started to build your first Power App. And then just wrapping up and things to consider. If you're going to start using things like Power Platform, you're probably going to need to look at your Microsoft 365 environment, look at the user accounts, like some of those things, like those are some other things that you should consider before you jump headfirst into building your solutions with Power Apps or Power Platform. So let's pause here for a second. So wanted to just tell my story about the inspiration behind this session. So I started a job in 2018. I was a SharePoint solutions designer. I had only had SharePoint on-prem, InfoPath, Designer, like those were my tools. Like that's what I knew how to do. And I interviewed at this place, and they, when I was in the interview, they asked me about SharePoint Online, and I'm like, great, they want to get to SharePoint Online. I'm going to help them with their migration. Because I know how to do migrations to on-prem to online. This is wonderful. So I took this job, and then I showed up, and day one, they said, yeah, we need to get off this third-party workflow system. And I was like, okay, like we can look at, I don't know, Power Apps and Power Automate. And they're like, yeah, go ahead. So they gave me like the entire project. Day one, starting this new job, had to migrate them to SharePoint Online. Didn't understand what Power Platform was, but I used this 6-step process that I developed. It took me 9 months to build my first form. I want to make sure everyone knows that too, that this is not quick and it's not easy. But I was just an admin person that figured out how to do this. And I want to share with other people who are just starting out how to do this, just to give you confidence that you can, and to let you know some of the things I ran into and some of the things that were kind of difficult for me to understand coming into the whole online from the on-prem world. So that's kind of what this session is about. So let's jump right into it. I start with a couple slides, and then I want to just go into some demo. So we'll probably do about 5 to 10 minutes of slides here, and then I will just hop over straight to the demo. So let's get started. So if we lay the land here, today we're going to talk about how to start a Power App, but we are going to actually look at the Power Apps that are embedded within SharePoint lists. So if you look at the screen now, we have SharePoint. So most users are familiar with like SharePoint on-prem, and then in the online world, we use SharePoint Online. And then for form designers, people generally use InfoPath for on-prem. Hopefully not anymore. Hopefully everyone is working to migrate off of InfoPath because we all know support's going away soon. But we're going to look at how to build Power Apps, that gold star there. That's what we're going to talk about. And then with workflows, generally with on-prem, you would use like SharePoint Designer or some kind of third-party tool. And in online, we use Power Automate for that. So moving on here, if we're going to talk about using Power Apps in a SharePoint list, first of all, for anyone that doesn't know, what is a SharePoint list? So a SharePoint list is this is a screenshot of what a SharePoint list is. When you're inside of SharePoint, it's really just a collection of data that you can share with your team members. It's kind of like a electronic Excel list, essentially. This is a specific example of a list that has a little bit of list formatting. So you can see there's like a hover card for that approval process. The department approval field has some coloring there. So just wanted to introduce you to what we're actually going to use for our data source for our Power App. And that is a SharePoint list. SharePoint lists, if you are on a SharePoint site, you can see that I've got some marked here. This is what they look like on the back end. And then how does this differ from a Microsoft list? So when you're in Microsoft 365 and you see that little lists icon in the waffle, so a SharePoint list and a Microsoft list are essentially the same backend, but the Microsoft lists, whenever you create them and put them under My List, those are stored on your OneDrive. So what we're going to do is use the SharePoint lists that are on our SharePoint sites to build out a Power App. So just wanted to clarify all that. Also, why would you want to use a SharePoint list as a data source? You can use SharePoint lists, you can use Dataverse. There's multiple places to use your Power App for, but one of the most common that I've found is using just a SharePoint list for a data source. So SharePoint lists are easy to create. You know, it's easy to change the records if you need to. They're great for visibility for other people that are using your Power App. They're included in most of the M365 licensing. So everything you see that we're doing today is already included in like pretty much the standard licensing. And SharePoint lists are easy to integrate with other pieces of the M365 stack. So they're a very great, lightweight data source for Power Apps. There are some limitations with it though. You know, SharePoint is not a relational database. So if you need to do lots of lookups and lots of data relationships, that's probably not the place for you. It's more of a Dataverse app. There's threshold limits too, like you can only have 5,000 records in a list. Like you can have more, but that's when you start to see that degradation is when we get over that threshold of 5,000. These customized list forms that I'm going to show you with Power Apps, you can't copy them to another location easily. You can if you do a little bit of code, but you can't if you just create a copy of your list and move it to a different site. That customized list form does not come with it. So that also means that your forms can be difficult to locate sometimes. If users are filling these out via a link and you don't know where that source list lives, they can be difficult to locate because they don't show up on like if you have a COE and you're scanning for apps, they don't show up on those reports. So pros and cons there, but it's okay to use them for general, simple use cases, I would say. So I've got 3 more slides and then we'll be done with slides, I promise. We'll go into demo. But I just want everyone to understand when I was building this or replacing their third-party system, I had 2 main objectives. So 2 main solutions that I had to replace with Power Apps. And I think that it's important to tell people about this because most companies have some sort of variation of these objectives. So the document control solution. So I had to replace, like, they had a SharePoint site that had all these policies and procedures that needed to be signed off on. It was kind of like an annual basis where they would go in and they'd have to review these libraries and they needed some sort of form and approval process behind the scenes. So document control was one of them. The second one is a project submission solution. So think of just like a site that has kind of enterprise projects and then supplemental documents that they wanted to tie to this master project number, which also required, approvals and submitted requests. So those are kind of the two use cases that I had for my Power App. So laying all that groundwork out, I want to move into the actual step one of my 6-step process of how you're going to build your first Power App. So the first thing is learn the tools. Like, that's much easier said than done, I understand, but there are so many resources out there nowadays for learning Power Apps. Back when I was doing this in 2018, it was pretty much Shane Young was the only person out there that was making videos at that point in time. But nowadays, there's so many resources. But just go to a community call, get on a user group just like this one. Go to YouTube. I'm sure there's thousands of videos out there. But also, when you're learning the tool, go and find a video of someone that is doing something in Power Apps and just kind of see what they're doing. Like, what are they clicking on? Like, they open up the designer screen, like, where are they going? Like, just try to understand, familiarize yourself with the actual designer. Because when you first open it up, it's quite intimidating because there's so many controls and you don't even know where to start. Go watch a video and see where they start. See where they're clicking and kind of understand. And then the second piece there is make a list of concepts that you want to learn and work through those. So, for example, if you like for my enterprise project submission and the document control, so I'm thinking of those concepts that I would need a form for those. So, I've got my project submission form. Like, what do I need to know? Like, when I submit a Power App and it goes to SharePoint, how do I actually name it? Like, how do I attach a document to my form and how do I have it move to a different library? Like, start walking through those specific things to build out what you want to build on your form so that you can understand how that works in Power Apps. So looking there on the right side too, how would you do that if you're using InfoPath? How would you translate that to Power Apps? How do I do cascading dropdowns? How do I do that conditional visibility? If this field is showing, then, if this field is yes, how do we show the second field? Like, start to build out those concepts because then you're actually building out your form build there. So just by packaging together all those concepts, you're starting to understand how to get started with the form and how to actually build that component. So rather than getting stuck on the whole, like, oh my gosh, I have to build this project submission form with all these fields and all these things, start thinking about it the opposite direction. Think about the concepts that you're trying to understand how to do and then build in your fields. So hopefully that makes sense, but that's what I would encourage you to do. Also, all these concepts, like, how do I take an attachment and move it to a new library? Someone has probably already created a video about how to do it on YouTube. So if you can understand the concepts that you want to do, someone will tell you how to do it via a video or someone in the community, and then you're pretty much already good to go with your form build there. So step 2 is let's hone in on that one main concept. So I framed my whole form around this main concept when I started. So when I add an attachment to a list form in SharePoint, I want a workflow to be able to move those documents to a new library and assign some metadata. So if we think about this in the document control context, so someone submitted a request form to be able to edit a policy, and they would attach the policy that was in progress, and that's the one that they would upload to the policy library when approved. So that's the document control version of it. For project management, they would submit a project request, they would attach multiple documents, and then we move these to a supplemental document library and we assign metadata from that original project that they requested. So this was a very small use case or concept, but it was a huge impact because this was not working in their third-party workflow. So they really wanted to move tools because of this reason. So if you can find something in there, some nugget that is going to have a huge impact, that'll be good for your first build as well. So that was my main concept that I wanted to focus on. So let's move on to step 3, and I think that's where we're actually going to get started and go hop into the demo. So let me stop sharing this, and I'm going to share my demo screen. Let me share this one here. I'm going to turn my camera off since I'm looking the other direction. Okay, so first thing here is that we're going to get started. We're going to actually build out our form. So we have a SharePoint list here. So I have just a simple like project submission list, as I've been mentioning this whole time about those examples. So we're going to start, we're working a little bit backwards because we're going to actually create the columns that we want on our form first, and then we're going to layer the form on top of it. So here I have just a simple SharePoint list that has the fields title, submitter, and project status in it. So project status is a choice field, and then submitter is a people picker, and then a title. So basically you're just submitting a project title, put a submitter with it, and then there's a project status column. So if I'm going to get started building my Power App from here, all I have to do is go to the ribbon and click on integrate, and then Power Apps, and then I can do this customize forms here. And then that's going to open up the Power Apps designer here. So this is the, as I mentioned, we are building a Power Apps that's, we're customizing the list form in Power Apps is what we're doing. So what I mean by that is when we click this add new item, this standard list form right here that you would normally see, this is what we're going to edit with Power Apps. So again, I clicked on add new item. This is the basic SharePoint list form. We're going to layer a Power App right on top of here. I'm going to override that because I've got it open on a different window. All right, so I actually want to, one second, sorry, I'm just making sure I got the right one. I am actually going to delete this and start over because I want to show you what this looks like. I was practicing this last night, so let me show you how to, I'm going to wipe this and start from scratch. So I'm going to wipe this form that I was customizing in Power Apps. So I just came over to the list settings, click on form settings, and then I can do delete custom form, and that actually deletes the Power App from the list. So let's start over. Sorry, I forgot to reset that. All right, so again, we just wiped the Power App. Let's go to here, and then let's do customize forms. Now this should open up again the Power App designer, and then that will bring me to that form. If it loads. Are there any questions? Well, oh, no, there we go. Just kidding. We'll come back if there's any. So this is what I wanted to see. All right, so this, as I mentioned before, when you click that integrate button and you do customize list form, like this is what it drops you in. And if you are not familiar with this interface at all, this is kind of intimidating. Like I did not even know where to start. I did not understand what I was looking at. So that's why I mentioned go find a video of people that are editing and just go see what they're clicking on so you can see where they're what they're changing about the field. And now that we have Copilot 2, that adds a whole new layer of getting started. So I think that's really going to help users get started building these things. But if you, again, still, even if you have Copilot, seeing this for the first time is sometimes intimidating. So when I first built this, I was like, all right, I've got my form. I just want to see what it looks like. So you can click on the play here, and then this is what it shows right off the bat. And so I had deleted this like 3-4 times. I did not understand what I was breaking by doing simply nothing. I just create the form and it was already broken, which was a great start. So when you first create your form, it's going to default to edit mode. So what you need to do to change that is if you click on this SharePoint Form 1 on the left side, this default mode right here is in edit, meaning when you are in a SharePoint list with records, like this one, and I click edit, that is what's edit mode. So it's actually pulling up the form with the data in edit mode. So that's why it shows up blank at first. So we want to actually customize the new form, the one that, to put items into the list. So we want to go ahead and change this to new. And then if I click on the preview, now you can see your fields and you can start editing or creating your form. So again, when you first click that button, make sure you click on SharePoint 1 or SharePoint form and then change the default mode to new. All right, so the other thing that you want to change, that's the first thing you want to change right away. The second thing you want to decide on right away is your layout. Do you want to have this in a vertical, or do you want to have this in a landscape? If you decide this later on and you've already edited all your fields and got all the formatting correct, it's going to wipe everything when you change it. So make sure you decide that right from the get-go. So I'm going to change this to landscape. So I'm going to go to the settings, which is down here on the left side. And then under display, there is an orientation. So you can see right now that it's in portrait. So it's going to display on the side like this, where that purple bar is there. So I'm going to change this to landscape, and it's going to warn you that it will change your formatting. So I said apply. And then I'm going to change this to large here, apply. So this is what I want it to do, is show, it's going to give me some more real estate then to work with my form. So I want it to be landscape, and I want it to, be like this on my screen. So you can see now that it flipped it to landscape, and then my fields got stretched a little bit. So again, do your formatting at the end. It's another tip, because if you decide to change something about it, everything is going to get wiped and you'll have to redo it. So, all right, so we did the default mode, and then we changed to landscape. So that's for the get started here. So let's just pause there for a minute and let's do a quick overview of the screen. So if you're just looking at the lay of the land here, on the left side, this is really your form controls. So if I were to click on form screen 1, that is actually this big white box in the background. Ignore everything in the front of it, but that is what this form screen 1 is. So it's the actual white box that you're seeing. And then if you click on SharePoint Form 1, it always highlights what you're clicking onto. So SharePoint Form 1 is everything that's highlighted in the purple border there. So that means that is what's actually, you're customizing the form that is pushing data to the SharePoint list. So you can get even more granular with it here. Let's zoom in a little bit. And if I click on, for example, the project status, so that right there is a field. So as you saw in the beginning on the list, there was a title column, a submitter, which is the people picker, and then the project status column, and then there's attachments. So it's pulling in all of these fields from that SharePoint list and presenting them to you. So again, you're customizing the form that you're putting data into the SharePoint list. So these are the fields that you can fill out to do so. And then if I actually expand this, you can even get more granular. And you can click on things like this data card value 3. This is actually the dropdown that you're going to use for project status. I can get as granular as if I click on star visible, like that means if it's required, the star will be visible there. Like I can really control every single piece of this form at a very granular level of how the design looks. So the data cards are what houses the actual fields themselves, and then the data card value would be the actual field itself. And you can rename these because data card doesn't really mean a lot to everybody. So you could call this like project status. You just can't put spaces, but I would do something like that and put underscore DD, so that's the dropdown. And then this is my project status field now. But when I start using formulas and start referring to this box, you can then use these names versus things like data card 1. Any questions? I'll pause there for a minute. Is there any questions before we continue? It's like, if there is any questions, feel free to just raise your hand and stop me and I can clarify anything, but otherwise we'll just keep going.
Is there a standard naming convention for like DD?
There's not really. It's kind of open to whatever you want it to be, but I just generally do DD or TXT for text fields. You just have to make sure that there's no spaces there.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Let's move on to step 4 then. All right, so step 4 is customizing the new and edit forms. So I kind of related this presentation to InfoPath too. If you've used InfoPath in the past, it was very easy to customize the new and edit forms. So what do I mean by that? So when we submit an item, when you click on add new, this is the new item form. But let's say that if I'm editing data, or sorry, when it's new, I don't want people to submit the project status. Like I just want this to come in as new, and I don't want them to actually see this field. But once they submit a record and I go and edit it, I want it to be there. So I'm having users submit their project status, or users submit the project submission form with only the title and then maybe their name. And then me as an admin, I want to open this item and I want to see project status. So how do we actually make those changes to the new and edit forms? So let's look at how to do that with Power Apps. So I've got one here. Sorry, everything is behind there. I gotta. All right, so there's two different methods that you can do for this. So the first method is duplicating the form screens. There's a link that I've included in the resources of this this slide deck that takes you to like a Microsoft article that tells you exactly how to do this. But I just wanted to point out that there are two different ways to do it. So with this first one is duplicating the form screen. So you should see that when we loaded this before, we just had the one screen and then we drilled into all the fields. So what you can do is you can click on that actual screen and then you can do duplicate screen. So you could copy that screen 3 times basically. So let's start here because this was the new item form. So I can duplicate that, and what that does is that I'm going to use when the form is new, I want to use this create screen. When the form is in edit mode, I want to use this one. And when it's in the view mode, I want to use this one. So I can customize the experience on 3 different experiences then essentially for those 3 different forms. And then in this SharePoint integration button here, over here on the right side, this is where you tell it which form to use. So it says when the form is new, then you use the create form. If it's an edit, you use the edit form. So again, I'll link the article, the Microsoft article that takes you through all this, but that's how you can set those up. And so let's take a look at the use case then. So I mentioned that I don't want to show this project status if my form is new. So I can just click right on this project status field here. And then up here in the section, we'll go over this top bar too later in the presentation, but in this top bar here, there's a drop-down menu of the things that you can change about that field. So I want to change the visible because I'm on the new item form. I want to make this false. And then it should hide that field, which I don't know why it's not right now. Goodness, are we just really slow or? Hold on, let's try a different field. Oh, read only. That's why it's in read only. No, it's in edit mode. Let me try again. Visible. Oh my goodness. All right, let's reopen this form. This one is project submission demo. Sorry guys, 1 second. So I'm going to reopen this. Any questions while this is loading up? All right, so we were on the create screen and we want to hide project status. Okay, so now it took. So because we don't see project status there. So I can click on my project status, I can go to my visible, and we can see that it's false. So now when we are, you can see here that it'll be hidden for that form. And then if we're on the edit mode, you can see the project status will be there. So that's method 1, is duplicating these screens and then actually controlling the visibility on those individual fields, whether you want to see them or not. The other method is you can use just an expression to do that. So let me open up my other one here. So this one I already have it hidden. Let's add it back in. Apparently when I queued everything up last night, it decided to freeze everything now. That's what I get for preparing ahead of time. Okay. All right, we're gonna reopen this one again. Sorry. All right, now you're seeing how to reopen the forms, I guess. So again, the second method is to use expressions. So we can basically write an expression on that field that says, if this form is new, then hide this field, otherwise show it. And that's what we're gonna do here. All right, so the project status field here. Okay, so this is the new form again. So how do we write that formula is we click on the field, and then under the visible property up here, we just say if, and then we're going to say if SharePoint form 1 dot mode, because that's the whether it's a new edit or view equals 1, which is new, then false, otherwise true. So I believe 1 is new and edit is 0 for modes. So then you can see here that it hit it because the form is in new mode. So if you want to test this, then you can just click on the SharePoint form 1. And then I'm going to change this mode here to edit, and then you should see that field come back. So then there's the project status field, and I'm going to change this back to new and edit. So that's how you can test it when you're flipping between the various modes. You don't have to necessarily publish it and try it out, but you can flip between default mode there to see. So those are the two different methods. Let me go back to the deck just for a second so we can look at that. So in my slides here, I talked through about the various methods, but just some pros and cons of this. You know, when you are using that duplicate form screen, the first option that we look at, remember that now you're using 3 different screens for your app. So if you make a change to one of those screens, you have to make it 3 times just to keep your app consistent, because you want your users to have that experience where they don't even realize that they're using different screens. So keep that in mind if you do change something. Otherwise, if you use that same form and you use those formulas to say, if in new mode, show this, otherwise don't, just use that if you have a small number of fields, because if you have a very large form and you're writing a ton of code for that, it could slow down your app depending on how large it is. So it can be difficult to maintain if you have a bunch of row level rules that you're trying to remember when it's showing what. So just kind of use your best judgment on that as to which method you should use, but they're both there and they're both okay to use. All right, so let's look at the form design too. That's the next one. So let me share my screen again, and we'll take a look at what we can do out of the box for sharing. So let's hop back over to demo. All right, so just for some very basic design things that you can do, there are themes that are built in if you want to apply just a standard theme. So if we click on form screen, make sure the form screen is selected here. Then in the top, there's a theme, and there are some built-in ones that you can change, and then it will automatically change the colors for you. I don't know if you're like me and I'm terrible at designs and themings. These are some pre-selected themes for you that I believe are run through the accessibility checker as well. So you know that you're good to go there for theming. You can use one of those built-in ones. So with InfoPath, if you've come from an InfoPath background like me, it was super easy to design forms. Like it was basically like a drag and drop experience. Like it was just a a sheet, and then you could merge cells and you could drag things around. It was super easy. Power Apps is not that intuitive when it comes to design. So I do want to point out some things. Again, if you're just getting started with this, there's column options. So this is on by default. This snap to columns, we'll talk about that in a second. But there's a column over here on the side. Make sure that your SharePoint Form 1 is selected so that you're editing this experience here. So for columns, it's in 1 right now. You can change it to 2, and then it will automatically divide your things for you there. You could do 3. So there's a column, pre-selected options here. If you're in columns 2 and you want to make this department larger, you only have 2 options. You have this, or you have the full length. It doesn't let you stop in the middle here and to put it like 3/4 or anything. If you want to do that, you have to just turn off the snapped columns. And then now I have a little bit more freedom as to resizing my fields there. So that was the snap to columns. But then if I turn this back on, it's going to wipe everything I just did and go back to put it back into columns. So as I mentioned before, do all your formatting at the end, because you never know what fields you're going to add in or anything like that. So that's one of my tips there. So those are the basic design options there. If you have a bunch of fields on your form, you can click on this fields here. This is what it's pulling from the SharePoint list. So if you needed to add additional fields or something, you would just click on add field. And then this is what's available to me in that SharePoint list. So to add more data into my form, I can just go to my SharePoint list, add it, and then refresh, and then I would be able to see it here and pull it into my form. Otherwise, you can drag and drop these around. Like if I want to move project status up above project submitter, you can drag them this way. Otherwise, you can drag them on the field, on the card here too. It's a little bit less intuitive when you're dragging around on here. So you have this option as well to drag them here. If you want to add in like a header, for example, let's say we want to split this and have a section here that, between this and attachments. We want to put like some sort of header here. We can do that by using a custom card. So if I am in here, let's go back to the fields, and then I click on this ellipsis here. If I click on add a custom card, what that's doing is it's just kind of putting like a placeholder there. So if I'm going to drag this above attachments, and then I can see that this is my header section here. I'm going to go back to 1 column. And then I want my custom card down here above attachments. There we go. So now I can put in like a text label or something here if I wanted to do like a header section. Just call it header. And then I could, turn this color just so you can see. Oops, I want this to be blue. So that is how you add in like header sections, or if you need any instructions on your form or anything like that, you would just add in, you make sure you clicked on form here, go to fields, add in this custom card, and then you can put in like a text section to break up your form a little bit for design purposes. Some other things to note is that you can do, for spacing, sometimes there's an error messages fields on here that can get stuck sometimes. So when I was starting, let me go back to the 2 columns again. If for some reason you can't make your fields any smaller, and this one's okay right now, but let me see where okay. So this little error message thing here, I'll show you on the left side. This error message, this is what, when you have like a required field and it pops up a red message that you need to fill out the field, this sometimes will get stuck like down here. And then if you're trying to resize and it won't let me go any higher than this, sometimes they can get stuck down there. So just click on that error message to see where that's at. And then you can drag that up, and then you're able to actually resize your fields as you need to. So watch out for those error messages. That was another thing that I got stuck on doing this for the first time. So the other thing you can do is add in a component. So if I wanted to do like a header on this form or something, maybe I want to push out a consistent header with my branding across all my forms in my organization, you can create what's called components. So in here on the components, I can go ahead and create a new one. So I am going to make this the width of my app, which is 1185 and then 100. So this is going to go right at the top of my form there. So I'm going to put in a text label and just say, like, let's say we're building the project submission form. So project. All right. And then I can make this bigger. I can also add in some personalization to this. Like if I want to add in like my user profile picture here and say, welcome to the user, I can do that. So I'm going to insert a picture image here. And then for the image, to pull in the user, there's two ways you can do it. You can use an Office 365 connector to look up that information, or you can just use this user dot, and then here's image. So it's pulling in my image as the logged in user. And then I'm going to add in one more label. And you can do the same thing for this. So we'll do like a welcome. And then I am going to talk about this formula bar too, if I'm going too fast with the commands there, but I will talk about it in pretty soon here. So email.fullname. So now it's got the name of the logged in user. If you want to add a little bit of simple personalization to your form, that's how you would do that. And then let's just change that, and then we'll put the background as this orange just to. All right, so this is my header, my component header. So I can add this to the form now. So I'm gonna actually drop this just a little bit because you can see it's gonna actually go in right here on the other background. So what I do now is I just do insert custom, and then my component is there. So now I have this header on my form that, you can push this across to different apps across the organization, have a consistent look and feel. But what's nice about this too is if, let's say you push out a header for your organization to use, and then I click in this, nothing can be changed. Like I can't edit anything about that. So it's a way of ensuring that consistent look and feel for your org with the branding colors or, the layout of the header there. So that's again, how you do a header video. That is one of those Shane Young videos that I used at the very beginning to learn how to do this. So the great thing about the community, like I said, someone's probably already done it and has a video about it, but wanted to point that out as that's how you can put a header on your forms. So that was a little bit about design. There are, I think in the creator kit or the Center of Excellence starter kit for Power Platform, there is a place to set up like a component library. So you could set that up if you're rolling out Power Platform and rolling out these kinds of forms. It's got those organizational components that you can set up, and then everyone can reference that same component library. So you have the consistency among your forms. All right, so let's move on. We're almost to step 6 here, but is there any other questions on design before we move on to a few other things? This is definitely designed for people who don't do design. I'm not a form designer, not going to pretend to be, but I wanted to show you the boxed options that are available and simple to use there. There is one more that I did forget about. I'm going to flip over to this one. So I built the header on this one too, but you can use your own company like colors fairly easily. I think this was another one of those tips that I found in the community. So if you click on the app here and then go to the on start, you can, oh, it's not this one. Maybe it's a different, hold on, let me try this one. Sorry, I have a whole bunch of them open. That there is a way to set in the on start a global variable that you can you basically set the variables. So you would basically set variables of your hex codes for your company. So let's say that you have a standard theming there. You can set a variable that says, you know, color 1 is this hex code, color 2 is this hex code, color 3, etc. So you set that on the on start. So then when you're designing your form, like for example, in this components, I can go to this fill color, and then I can reference that global variable of those hex colors that I set on the onStart. So that's a very easy way of importing your company colors and just referring to them as variables. So there is a good blog post out there about that, but wanted to point that out, that that's another thing you can do. I'm sorry it got wiped from the onStart. I wanted to show you that, but that's another good easy way that you can do some branding there. All right, so let's move on to the most intimidating part of Power Apps, which is this box up here, this section up here. I think this is what's got me freaked out about the whole application, because I just did not understand what to do with the formula bar. You know, if you're in InfoPath, it's pretty straightforward what you can do with those controls, but with this formula bar, there were so many things I didn't understand. I didn't know where to even get started, and I wanted to understand everything that was possible before I jumped in, which was not a great approach. So this formula bar up here, what you need to know is that the left side are the things that you can change, and then the right side is what you change it to. So let's go back to the screens here. So for example, this title card here, I can change the border color, the default value, the fill of the box, the X and Y coordinates. So those are the various properties that I can change. And the right side is what I change it to. So I can put in a number here for height. I can put in a color for the fill. Like, that's very oversimplification of this formula bar. If you don't like this formula bar, everything is pretty much over here on the right side too. So if you see height, I can also see, if it's not on the first page, it'll be here under the advanced too, but then there's height. So if you don't like this, you can also use the properties pane on the side. So it's kind of the same thing, repetition there. Use the IntelliSense or Copilot to help you with this formula bar. So let's just do a simple example here. And I'm going to unhide this project status column so we can work with it. Oh, not on this one though. We'll go back to the other one that's not broken. All right, let's unhide project status. Okay, I'm going to put this into one column. So let's say, for example, when I talk about using the IntelliSense, I want to set a box that has the project status value based on what's selected. So very simple example here. I've already got this button here, or this box here. I'll probably just use this one. So this one is label 1. So again, I want to reference what's in this project status dropdown. So that's a key point there is rename your data cards. So the project status dropdown is this box right here, and that is right now data card value 4. So I'm going to rename this to that project status _ dropdown. So I want to set this to be whatever is in this box. So I'm going to say I want this to be, and then use the IntelliSense. The IntelliSense starts to populate some things for you. So it says, okay, I want this to be the project status dropdown. If it's red, it means it's not done. So you got to hit the period and then see what else it wants from you. So I'm going to select the wrong one here, which is selected items. It's still red. I hit the period, and then it's red and there's nothing else presented to me, which means I have the wrong formula. So back up, and then we go hit the dot. There's another selected down here, and then it still needs something from me, and then value. So now we're good. So now everything is green. So that means that I have the right, or a correct formula in there. I'm not sure if it's the right formula, but it is a formula that it will accept. So let's test it and see. If I select a value here, all right, it shows in the box. So if I delete this, it should take that away. So the IntelliSense is there to help you with those formulas. It's like I said, it's come a long way since I started doing this. Copilot can help you develop those formulas, but that was just a simple of use the IntelliSense, hit the period, and if they're still red, then back it up and try it again. So that's what that needs. They generally you're generally going to end in something called value or result is what you'll notice as you're building out your formulas while you're building forms. So a couple other things to know about the form and the values and stuff is you can set things equal to each other. So for example, I can do, if that that project status field is hidden, then I want to hide this section too. Or if the project status, or the alternate, like if the project status is visible, then I want to open up this section. So let me show you a couple ways to do that. So for this one, we had on the visibility, we have if this was the if SharePoint form 1.mode equals 1, then false, otherwise true. So if it's new, we want to hide that project status column. But also we can just refer to that with our other fields. So I don't have to continue this formula on every single box. I can actually just refer to the project status field. So this section, I want this to also show when project status does. So I can go into the visible, and then I can just refer to that project status data card dot visible. Oops. So then I am not, again, I'm not repeating this formula, you know, on all my data cards there. I can just say, if project status is visible, then show this box as well. So let's flip over to, so now default mode here is new. So we see both those fields are hidden. If I flip this to edit, then you see project status and this section comes back. So again, that was we just did project status data card one, which is the parent of this project status here, and refer to that as visible. So you can do that with these, you know, values for visibility. You can do that for width too. So if I wanted to make these all align, I don't have to set like specific widths on everything. So I'm just going to make this project submitter inherit the width above it. So if I do width, it's going to follow the project submitter, which is project submitter data card 1 dot width. Why is that not? Oops. Oh, it doesn't like that. Let's try. Oh, that's because this should be project status, not project submitter. Data card 1 dot width. There we go. Okay. So now when I make this smaller, the snapped columns is on, so it's not allowing me to, there we go. When I make this smaller, then project submitter follows it. So it's an easy way to, you know, align that to all your forms below it if you want to have everything line up. So another thing you can do is you can disable the submit button until things are filled out. And there's also this property called valid, form valid, that I discovered. So as I was writing these forms, building them, I started to write these rules like, okay, I want to disable this submit button if this field is not filled out and if this one's not filled out. Like, it was a way to do like some, I wasn't sure how to say, if all the required fields are filled in, then allow this to be submitted. So there's a property called form valid. So let's take a look at this submit button here. So what I can do is I can go to display mode. And right now it's on edit because this button is editable. So I can say if SharePoint form 1, delete this so you can see better, dot, and then there's this valid. So what that does is it checks all the required fields. and makes sure that they're filled out before it allows you to do what you need to do. So form, if valid, then display mode dot edit, meaning you can submit the form, otherwise display mode dot disabled. And then the other thing I can do there is I can actually change the fill color to green. So then when the button is, when it's ready to be submitted, it can be green. So let's change this back to new here. And then I'll show you the preview. So this is just, the button is disabled now because the title is required. But if I hit I put a value there, it turned the button green. So very simple, kind of fun way to help your users understand like which fields are required if you're not using these, or just an easy way to give them a visual indicator that that the form is ready to be submitted. So with all that being said, you can then publish and save and publish your form. You don't have to publish it right away. You can just save it. But when you're done with this, you would just hit the publish button, and then it would publish it back to the list. And then you would go into that the same way we've been doing this whole time, where you go to the list and do customize forms to get back to this. So if you're building that, that's how you get back to this. How do you actually fill it out? Let me just hop over to the SharePoint list. So once you publish it and then you hit the new item, this is when your Power App will load right here. You can click this copy link, and then that is what you can use if you want to embed it like on your SharePoint page or something. That's how users can actually fill out your Power App to push data to this list. So that was kind of a roundabout, but full circle. Wanted to explain how you get through the form design and everything, and then close the loops as to publish your form and then fill it out. So I have one thing left to show you. Is one thing I struggled with is step 6 is configure your form defaults. So for example, if you're submitting a form, you probably want to default the submitter to the current user, but then you have to make sure that if you have to change the edit mode as well, because then if you default it to the current user, you want to make sure when they open the form to edit that it doesn't overwrite with that current user. So that is definitely code that you have to do on these forms. So I included the code in my slides, I believe, but this is the formula that you can say if it's new, if SharePoint Form 1 mode is 1, that means new, then fill in this current user. Otherwise, use this item.submitter, which is pulling that submitter field from the SharePoint list. So again, make sure that you fill out these defaults, because then this will default with my name. But then when I go in to edit this one, for example, like right here, Kyle Jordan's the submitter. So if I edit that, then we see that Kyle's name here pulls into the submitter and it doesn't overwrite. So that is the defaults. So I am going to quickly, I've got 2 minutes here. I'm going to flip back over to my 2 slides just to wrap it up for you. All right, so we got through the 6-step process here. I did recap the form design process into like a note card if you want, just to take you through everything you need to do to build your new form. Just some considerations too is if you're going to use SharePoint Online, you're going to use Power Apps, you're probably going to use SharePoint Online. So make sure that their SharePoint Online environment is set up. How are the users authenticating? Do they have everything set up in Entra? Like, make sure that you're ready to go, because if you're going to use a SharePoint list, they're going to have to get into SharePoint to use your form. So that's one thing you should definitely consider. SharePoint Online does browser-based editing. That's like the default. So make sure that users are comfortable with that. I know that you're building a Power App, but if you're going to deploy it into, again, SharePoint Online, then you're going to have to get users used to that experience of what things are like in SharePoint Online. So check on the browser-based editing. If you build a form, users are going to want a workflow. They're going to want a Power Automate workflow. So get ready for that. And then once you roll out your solution, make sure that if you did any testing with data connections in the form, make sure you delete them, because otherwise it'll roll those data connections out to your users. So be careful when you're deploying it. I learned that one the hard way. So wanted to bring that to light. And that is it. That's my contact information on screen. Feel free to reach out